Madison Carter sat alone at the corner table in Riverside High's cafeteria, methodically eating her turkey sandwich while sketching mathematical equations in the margins of her notebook. At 17, she had perfected the art of invisibility keeping. Her head down, speaking only when spoken to, and avoiding any situation that might draw unwanted attention. Her thick-rimmed glasses reflected the fluorescent lights as she calculated complex physics problems that most seniors couldn't even comprehend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 tables away, Derek Morrison slammed his fist on the table, causing his lunch tray to rattle. Did you see that freak Madison actually raised her hand in a P-Physics today? Acting like she's smarter than everyone else. His voice carried across the cafeteria, designed to humiliate rather than inform. Jessica Wells and Tyler Brooks, his loyal followers, snickered on cue. Madison's pencil froze mid-calculation. She had only answered because Mr. Peterson had specifically called on her after 30 seconds of awkward silence. The quantum mechanics question had been straightforward, at least to her. But in Derek's world, academic excellence from someone like Madison was apparently a crime punishable by public ridicule. What Derek and his crew didn't know was that Madison's mother, Chief Patricia Carter, was currently reviewing federal trafficking cases in her downtown office. Completely unaware that her daughter's quiet demeanor masked a growing storm of harassment that would soon demand the full force of federal law. Madison had always been different, though she wore that difference like a carefully guarded secret. While other kids her age obsessed over social media followers and weekend parties, she found solace in the predictable world of numbers and scientific principles. Her bedroom walls weren't covered with pop star posters, but with detailed star charts, periodic tables, and mathematical theorems she'd proven independently. The Carter family lived in a modest 2-story colonial on Maple Street, where Patricia had raised Madison as a single mother since her father's death in a car accident when Madison was 8. The house reflected both women's personalities. Patricia's law enforcement commendations hung beside Madison's academic awards, creating a gallery of achievement that few visitors ever saw. Chief Patricia Carter commanded respect throughout the entire state. At 42, she had worked her way up from beat cop to heading the Riverside Police Department, then accepting a federal appointment that put her in charge of multi-state criminal investigations. Her cases involved drug cartels, human trafficking networks, and organized crime syndicates that operated across state lines. Patricia's office walls displayed photographs with FBI directors, administrators, and federal judges who sought her expertise on complex criminal matters. But despite her mother's intimidating professional reputation, Madison never mentioned it at school. She had learned early that being the police chief's daughter came with its own set of complications. Kids either sucked up to her, hoping for special treatment, or they resented her, assuming she thought she was better than everyone else. Silence seemed safer. Madison's typical day began at 5:30 a.m. with an hour of studying before school. She maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA across 7 AP classes while most of her peers struggled with basic requirements. Her standardized test scores placed her in the 99th percentile nationally, and she had already received early admission offers from MIT, Stanford, and Caltech. Yet she moved through Riverside High's hallways like a ghost, speaking only to teachers, and spending lunch periods in the library or empty classrooms. The harassment had started 3 months earlier. Derek Morrison, whose father owned the largest construction company in town, seemed to take personal offense to Madison's academic success. Initially, it was just snide comments about her appearance, her unfashionable clothes, her worn backpack, her habit of eating alone. Madison ignored these petty insults, assuming they would eventually stop if she didn't react. Derek's background explained much of his antagonistic behavior. The Morrison family had built their wealth through questionable business practices that skirted ethical boundaries. Derek's older brother had been arrested twice for drunk driving, charges that mysteriously disappeared after generous donations to the policeman's benevolent fund. Derek himself had been suspended multiple times for fighting, but his father's political connections ensured minimal consequences. Jessica Wells came from old money. Her grandfather had been mayor for 16 years, and her family's name appeared on half the buildings in downtown Riverside. She possessed the kind of effortless beauty that opened doors and excused behavior that would destroy others. Jessica's cruelty was surgical in its precision, targeting insecurities with laser-like focus. Her alliance with Derek created a formidable social weapon that few students dared challenge. Tyler Brooks represented the most dangerous type of follower, intelligent enough to understand the cruelty, but lacking the moral courage to resist peer pressure. His parents were respected professionals who assumed their son shared their values. Tyler's participation in the harassment campaign would later prove particularly devastating because he documented everything, believing it would protect him if situations escalated. The first major incident occurred during Madison's AP chemistry class. She had finished a complex lab experiment 15 minutes before anyone else, achieving results that impressed even Dr. Martinez, who taught college-level courses at the community college during summers. As Madison carefully recorded her data, Derek loudly announced that she had probably cheated by looking up answers online. "There's no way some weird loser figured that out faster than everyone else," Derek declared, ensuring the entire class heard his accusation. She probably had her mommy help her with homework last night. Dr. Martinez quickly defended Madison's integrity, explaining that her solution demonstrated advanced understanding far beyond what any internet search could provide. But the damage was done. Doubt had been planted among their classmates, and Madison's face burned with humiliation as 30 pairs of eyes studied her. Reaction. The pattern escalated over the following weeks. Jessica began spreading rumors about Madison's family finances, claiming they lived in poverty despite Patricia's respectable salary. She invented stories about Madison's father abandoning the family, perverting the tragic truth of his accidental death into malicious gossip. Tyler started photographing Madison during vulnerable moments when she dropped books, spilled drinks, or appeared upset, then sharing these images in group chats with mocking captions. Madison's natural response was to withdraw further. She started eating lunch in her car, avoided common areas between classes, and requested permission to use teachers' bathrooms instead of student facilities where encounters with her tormentors were more likely. Her grades remained perfect, but dark circles appeared under her eyes as stress disrupted her sleep patterns. The psychological warfare intensified when Derek discovered Madison's passion for astronomy. She had been accepted to participate in a prestigious summer research program at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, an opportunity that would strengthen her college applications and provide hands-on experience with cutting-edge technology. When news of this achievement reached Derek through the school's academic newsletter, he saw it as another example of Madison's insufferable superiority. "Look at the little space nerd thinking she's going to be some famous scientist," Derek announced during lunch, projecting his voice across multiple tables. "Maybe aliens will take her away so we don't have to look at her anymore." The comment drew laughter from students who wouldn't normally participate in bullying but found safety in group mockery. Madison felt the familiar burning sensation in her chest as conversations stopped and heads turned in her direction. She gathered her belongings and walked toward the exit with measured steps, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. But Derek wasn't finished. He followed her into the hallway, his voice echoing off lockers as he continued his performance for an audience of younger students who watched with a mixture of fascination and horror. "Hey Madison, when you're up there looking at stars, maybe you can find a planet where freaks like you belong," he called out, his words carrying the casual cruelty that had become his trademark. Madison stopped walking. For 17 years, she had absorbed insults, ignored provocations, and chosen silence over confrontation. Her mother had taught her that responding to bullies only escalated situations unnecessarily. But something in Derek's tone, the absolute confidence that he could say anything without consequences, triggered a response that surprised even Madison herself. She turned around slowly, her brown eyes meeting Derek's blue ones with unwavering directness. The hallway fell silent as students sensed something different in the air, a shift in dynamics that none of them had witnessed before. "Derek," Madison said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness, "your understanding of astronomy is about as sophisticated as your understanding of basic human decency. Both appear to be non-existent." The hallway erupted in whispers and nervous laughter. Derek's face flushed red as he realized that the quiet girl had just delivered an insult that most students found cleverer than anything in his usual repertoire. His humiliation in front of younger students, his future victims, demanded immediate retaliation. "You think you're so smart with your big words, don't you?" Derek stepped closer, his physical presence meant to intimidate. "Maybe it's time someone taught you that being a know-it-all won't protect you from real life." Madison didn't step backward. Her heart pounded, but she maintained eye contact with the boy who had made her life miserable for months. She could smell his excessive cologne, see the anger in his expression, and feel the attention of dozens of students who had formed an impromptu circle around them. "Real life," Madison repeated thoughtfully, as if considering the phrase carefully. "Is that what you call hiding behind your father's money, while contributing nothing meaningful to the world? Because from my perspective, you're the one avoiding reality." The circle of students grew larger as word spread that quiet Madison Carter was finally fighting back. Phone cameras appeared, documenting a confrontation that would be analyzed and shared throughout the school within hours. "Jessica." Wells pushed through the crowd, her expression showing genuine concern for the first time since the harassment began. "Derek, maybe we should just go," Jessica suggested, recognizing that the situation was spiraling beyond their control. "She's not worth getting in trouble over." But Derek's pride had been wounded in the most public way possible. In his social circle, backing down from a confrontation with someone like Madison would damage his reputation permanently. He needed to reassert dominance quickly and decisively, regardless of consequences. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You want to talk about contributing to the world?" Derek's voice grew louder, more aggressive. "At least I'm not some pathetic loser whose own father couldn't stand being around her long enough to stick around." The hallway went completely silent. Even students who didn't know Madison personally understood that Derek had crossed a line that separated casual cruelty from genuine malice. Madison's expression didn't change, but several students later described seeing something shift in her eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there moments before. "My father died in a car accident when I was 8 years old," Madison said clearly, ensuring everyone could hear. "He was driving to pick up my birthday present when a drunk driver ran a red light. But I suppose researching facts before speaking would require intellectual effort that you're incapable of providing." Derek's mouth opened and closed without sound as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Even his closest friends looked uncomfortable with how far the confrontation had escalated. The crowd of students began murmuring among themselves, many expressing disgust at Derek's cruelty regarding Madison's family tragedy. In that moment, Madison made a decision that would change everything. Instead of walking away as she had done countless times before, she pulled out her phone and began recording. "Derek Morrison, student ID 847,293. Just publicly mocked my father's death in front of approximately 40 witnesses," she spoke clearly into her phone's camera. "This is the latest incident in a 3-month campaign of harassment that has included false academic accusations, invasive photography, and deliberate attempts to damage my reputation and emotional well-being. Derek lunged forward to grab Madison's phone, but she stepped smoothly aside with reflexes that surprised everyone present. Her voice remained calm and measured as she continued recording. And now he's attempting to destroy evidence of his behavior, which demonstrates consciousness of guilt regarding his actions. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period, but nobody moved. Students stood transfixed by a confrontation that had revealed sides of both participants that none of them had. Suspect existed. Madison calmly put her phone away and gathered her belongings from where she had dropped them minutes earlier. "I'll be reporting this incident to appropriate authorities," she announced to no one in particular. Federal law prohibits systematic harassment in educational environments, and I believe today's events provide sufficient evidence to pursue formal charges. As Madison walked toward her next class, Derek finally found his voice again. "You can't do anything to me," he shouted after her retreating figure. "My dad owns half this town, and your mom's just some small-town cop who thinks she's important." Madison paused at the classroom door and looked back one final time. "Actually, Derek, my mother is Chief Patricia Carter of the Federal Criminal Investigation Division. But I'm sure your research skills will help you figure out what that means." The hallway remained frozen as Madison disappeared into her AP literature class, leaving behind a crowd of stunned students and 3 bullies who were beginning to understand that they had severely miscalculated their target's resources and capabilities. The video went viral within 3 hours. Tyler Brooks had filmed the entire hallway confrontation on his phone, originally intending to capture Madison's humiliation for later entertainment. Instead, he had documented Derek's cool comments about her father's death, Madison's composed response, and Derek's physical attempt to destroy evidence. By the time school ended, the footage had been shared across every social media platform, tagged with hashtags like #BullyExposed and #JusticeForMadison. What Tyler hadn't anticipated was the internet's capacity for detective work. Within an hour of posting, anonymous users had identified Derek's family business, Jessica's social media accounts, and even Tyler's own role in the harassment campaign. Screenshots of their previous posts mocking Madison began circulating alongside the confrontation video, creating a comprehensive timeline of systematic bullying that painted all 3 in the worst possible light. Madison arrived home to find her mother's police cruiser already in the driveway, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. Chief Patricia Carter typically worked until 7, managing federal cases that spanned multiple time zones. Madison's stomach clenched as she realized someone must have informed her mother about the school incident. Patricia was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open beside a steaming cup of coffee and a manila folder marked "Confidential" in red letters. She looked up as Madison entered, her expression unreadable in the way that had intimidated countless criminals over the years. "Madison, we need to talk." "Mom, I can explain." Patricia held up a hand. "Sit down first, then explain." Madison sat her backpack down and took the chair across from her mother, the same seat where she had eaten thousands of meals and completed countless homework assignments. The familiar setting felt different now, charged with a tension that made her acutely aware of her mother's professional persona. "Principal Richardson called me an hour ago," Patricia began, her voice carrying the measured tone she used during official interrogations. "He said there was an incident involving you and 3 other students. He described it as a verbal altercation that got out of hand." Madison opened her mouth to respond, but Patricia continued. "Then Detective Williams from our cybercrime unit called me, apparently. A video of this verbal altercation has been viewed over 50,000 times and is trending on multiple platforms. He thought I should be aware that my daughter was involved in something gaining national attention." The weight of the situation settled on Madison's shoulders. She had wanted to stand up for herself, but she hadn't considered the broader implications of her actions. In the moment, recording Derek's behavior had seemed like the logical response. Now she realized she had potentially created problems for her mother's career. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean for it to become such a big deal." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Madison, I'm not angry with you. I'm concerned about what led to this confrontation. Principal Richardson's version of events doesn't match what I see in the video, which suggests he either doesn't understand the situation or is deliberately minimizing it." She opened the manila folder and removed several printed pages. Madison recognized screenshots from social media accounts, timestamped messages, and what appeared to be an official incident report. "After Detective Williams called, I made some inquiries," Patricia continued. "What I discovered is that you've been subjected to systematic harassment for months, and the school administration has either ignored it or failed to recognize its severity." Madison stared at the documents spread across their kitchen table. Seeing her torment reduced to official paperwork made it feel simultaneously more real and strangely distant. "How did you get all this information so quickly?" Patricia's smile held no warmth. "Madison, I investigate criminal conspiracies for a living. 3 teenagers leaving digital evidence of harassment isn't exactly a challenging case." She pointed to one of the screenshots. "Tyler Brooks has been photographing you without consent and sharing those images with mocking commentary. Under federal law, that constitutes cyberstalking. Jessica Wells has been spreading false information about our family's finances and your father's death. That's defamation with aggravating circumstances. And Derek Morrison's behavior today demonstrates a pattern of escalating harassment that creates a hostile educational environment." Madison felt a chill run down her spine as she realized her mother was building a legal case. "Mom, you're not going to arrest them, are you?" "I just wanted them to leave me alone." "Arrest them?" Patricia laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Madison, you're thinking too small. These aren't simple misdemeanor violations we're dealing with." She pulled out her phone and opened an app Madison didn't recognize. The screen displayed what appeared to be a complex organizational chart with photographs, names, and connecting lines. "The Morrison Construction Company has been under federal investigation for 18 months, Patricia explained, scrolling through the information. "We suspect them of using undocumented workers, evading taxes, and potentially laundering money through shell corporations. Derek's father, Robert Morrison, has connections to the Castellano crime family through his concrete supplier contracts." Madison's eyes widened. She had always known Derek's family was wealthy, but she hadn't imagined they might be involved in actual criminal activity. Jessica Wells's grandfather wasn't just mayor, he was under investigation by the FBI for accepting bribes from development companies when he approved zoning changes. The Wells family fortune comes from land deals that may have involved federal fraud. Jessica's trust fund exists because her grandfather sold protected wetlands to developers who knew they couldn't legally build there. Patricia swiped to another section of the app. "And Tyler Brooks's parents may seem like respectable professionals, but his father's accounting firm handles finances for several businesses we've been monitoring. If we can prove Tyler has been cyberstalking you, we can obtain warrants to search his devices and potentially uncover evidence of his father's client activities." The kitchen felt smaller as Madison processed this information. Her personal conflict with 3 classmates had intersected with federal criminal investigations in ways she couldn't have imagined. So when Derek said his dad owns half the town, he was closer to the truth than he realized, Patricia confirmed. But what he doesn't understand is that federal jurisdiction supersedes local influence. His father's political connections can't protect him from charges filed in federal court. Patricia closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "Madison, I need you to understand something important. What happened to you today wasn't an isolated incident of teenage drama. It was the culmination of a systematic campaign designed to intimidate and humiliate you. That behavior violates federal civil rights laws, and the perpetrators chose their victim poorly. What do you mean? They targeted the daughter of a federal law enforcement officer who specializes in investigating exactly the type of criminal activity their families are involved in. Derek Morrison essentially walked into a trap he didn't know existed. Madison felt a strange mixture of vindication and unease. She had wanted justice, but the scope of what her mother was describing seemed overwhelming. What happens now? Patricia reopened her laptop and began typing. Now I file an official report with the FBI Civil Rights Division. The harassment you've experienced meets the criteria for federal hate crimes prosecution, especially since it targeted you based on your academic achievements and social status. Her fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard as she spoke. I'm also requesting warrants to examine the digital devices of all 3 students. Their social media activity, text messages, and photo storage will provide evidence of the harassment campaign's scope and duration. Will they find out that you're investigating their families too? Eventually, yes, but that's not your concern. Patricia's voice took on the steel edge Madison recognized from phone calls about dangerous criminals. Those families have been operating under the assumption that their local influence provides protection from federal oversight. They're about to learn otherwise. The front door opened and closed, followed by footsteps in the hallway. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Patricia's longtime partner and Madison's unofficial stepmother, appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing her hospital scrubs. I came as soon as I got your message, Sarah said, immediately assessing the tension in the room. How bad is it? Worse than the school realizes, better than our enemies hoped. Patricia replied cryptically. Sarah pulled out a chair and sat down beside Madison. As head of pediatric surgery at Riverside General Hospital, she had developed instincts about reading traumatic situations quickly. Madison, are you physically hurt? No, nothing like that. They never actually touched me. Emotional trauma is still trauma, Sarah said gently. And systematic harassment can cause lasting psychological damage even without physical violence. Patricia nodded approvingly, which is another reason why federal prosecution is appropriate. The courts recognize that psychological terrorism can be as damaging as physical assault. Sarah's medical training kicked in as she studied Madison's appearance. When did you last eat a full meal? And how have you been sleeping? Madison realized she couldn't remember eating lunch that day, and her sleep had been irregular for weeks. The stress of constant harassment had affected her physically in ways she hadn't fully acknowledged. I've been okay, just busy with school and college applications. Madison, Sarah's voice carried the gentle authority she used with frightened young patients. Your mother and I are both trained to recognize signs of chronic stress. You don't have to minimize what you've been going through. Patricia looked up from her laptop. Sarah's right. The medical documentation of stress-related symptoms will strengthen the federal case. Systematic harassment that causes documented physical health problems elevates the charges significantly. You want me to see a doctor? I want you to see Sarah, Patricia clarified. She can document any physical symptoms you've experienced and provide expert medical testimony about the effects of prolonged psychological stress on adolescent development. Sarah squeezed Madison's hand. This isn't about making you seem damaged or weak. It's about providing objective evidence that the harassment caused real harm that extends beyond hurt feelings. Madison felt overwhelmed by how quickly her simple desire to stand up for herself had escalated into a federal investigation involving multiple families and potential criminal charges. What if I don't want to go through with all this? What if I just want to graduate quietly and go to college? Patricia saved her work and closed the laptop. Madison, that choice was taken away from you the moment Derek Morrison decided to publicly mock your father's death. Some actions have consequences that extend beyond the perpetrator's intentions. But listen to me carefully. Patricia's voice softened but maintained its firmness. Those 3 students documented their harassment campaign extensively. The evidence exists whether you cooperate with prosecution or not. The only question is whether you participate in seeking justice or allow them to believe their behavior was acceptable. Sarah added, from a medical perspective, addressing trauma through appropriate legal channels often provides better psychological outcomes than trying to ignore or minimize the experience. Madison looked between the 2 women who had raised her, both experts in their fields, both committed to protecting her in ways she was only beginning to understand. If we go through with this, what happens to them? Patricia's smile returned, cold and professional. That depends on what we find when we examine their devices and investigate their family's activities. But at minimum, they'll face federal civil rights charges that carry potential prison sentences and permanent criminal records. And their families? Their families will discover that local political influence doesn't protect against federal investigations that have been ongoing for years. Derek's father has been building his business empire on foundations that won't withstand scrutiny. Jessica's family has been living off money that may not have been legally obtained. And Tyler's parents have been enabling criminal activity through willful ignorance of their clients' illegal operations. The weight of potential consequences settled over the kitchen like a heavy blanket. Madison had wanted her tormentors to face accountability, but she hadn't imagined that accountability might extend to destroying entire family enterprises. They chose to target you, Sarah said quietly, reading Madison's expression accurately. They chose to document their harassment. They chose to escalate the situation publicly. You're not responsible for the consequences of their choices. Patricia stood up and walked to the window overlooking their backyard, where Madison's childhood swing set still stood despite years of weathering. Madison, tomorrow morning I'm meeting with FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres, who heads the Civil Rights Division's Educational Harassment Task Force. She wants to interview you about the full scope of what you've experienced. After that, we'll know more about the timeline for federal charges. Will I have to testify in court? Possibly. But you won't be alone, and the evidence is strong enough that plea bargains are likely for all 3 defendants. Madison realized that her quiet life at Riverside High was ending whether she wanted it to or not. The confrontation in the hallway had set in motion events that would reshape multiple families and potentially send her classmates to federal prison. Mom? Yes? When you investigate criminal families, do you ever feel bad about destroying their lives? Patricia turned away from the window and met her daughter's eyes directly. Madison, I feel bad about the children who grow up believing that money and influence put them above the law. But I never feel bad about holding criminals accountable for their choices, regardless of their age or family connections. The evening news played softly in the background as they sat in contemplative silence, each processing the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Madison's phone buzzed with dozens of notifications from classmates and strangers who had seen the viral video. But she left it untouched. Tomorrow, the real investigation will begin. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres arrived at Riverside High School at 7:15 a.m., 30 minutes before classes began. Her unmarked black sedan pulled into the visitor parking space directly in front of the main entrance, a deliberate choice designed to signal federal presence to anyone paying attention. Torres had spent 15 years investigating civil rights violations in educational settings, and she understood the psychological impact of visible federal involvement. Agent Torres, I want to assure you that Riverside High has comprehensive anti-bullying policies. Richardson began as they walked toward his office. What happened yesterday was an isolated incident between students who normally get along fine. Torres stopped walking and turned to face the principal directly. At 43, she had developed an intimidating presence that could silence experienced criminals, and Richardson was clearly out of his depth. Mr. Richardson, I've reviewed the social media evidence collected by our cybercrime division. What I see is a 3-month systematic harassment campaign that violated multiple federal statutes. If you're characterizing that as students who normally get along fine, then we have a serious problem with your administrative oversight. Richardson's face flushed as he realized his attempt to minimize the situation had backfired spectacularly. I meant that we haven't had any formal complaints filed through proper channels, because the victim believed she had to handle the situation alone, Torres interrupted. Which raises questions about whether your school provides adequate protections for students experiencing harassment. They reached Richardson's office, where Torres immediately noticed the degrees and awards covering the walls, all emphasizing his administrative achievements rather than student welfare initiatives. She had seen similar offices in schools where administrators prioritized reputation management over actual student protection. Agent Torres, how can I assist with your investigation? Torres opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder containing screenshots, transcripts, and legal documents. You can start by explaining why your anti-bullying policies failed to prevent or address a harassment campaign that was extensively documented on social media, platforms your students use daily. Richardson leaned forward to examine the documents, his expression growing increasingly concerned as he recognized posts from students he knew personally. Tyler Brooks's Instagram account showed dozens of photos taken without Madison's consent, each accompanied by mocking captions that had received hundreds of likes and comments from Riverside High students. I wasn't aware that this level of activity was occurring, Richardson admitted quietly. That's exactly the problem, Torres replied. Federal law requires educational institutions to maintain environments free from harassment that interferes with students' ability to participate in educational programs. Your lack of awareness doesn't excuse your failure to fulfill that obligation. Meanwhile, across town, Patricia Carter was conducting her own investigation from the federal building. Downtown, her office had been transformed into a command center, with multiple computer monitors displaying financial records, surveillance footage, and communication intercepts related to the Morrison, Wells, and Brooks families. Detective Marcus Williams from the cybercrime unit knocked on Patricia's door, carrying a laptop bag and several external hard drives. Chief, we executed the search warrants for the students' devices this morning, Williams reported. What we found goes far beyond simple bullying. Patricia gestured for him to sit down and connect his equipment to her secure network. Show me what you discovered. Williams plugged in the first hard drive and opened a folder containing thousands of files. Tyler Brooks had been documenting not just Madison, but multiple other students he and his friends considered targets. We found detailed profiles with personal information, family backgrounds, and what they called vulnerability assessments. The monitor displayed a spreadsheet that made Patricia's blood run cold. Tyler had created a database of potential victims, ranking them by perceived social status, family wealth, and likelihood to fight back. Madison's entry showed she had been classified as a high-value target, specifically because of her academic achievements and apparent isolation. This wasn't random bullying, Patricia realized. They were operating a systematic intimidation program. It gets worse, Williams continued, opening another folder. Derek Morrison's phone contained evidence that they were planning to escalate their campaign against Madison. They discussed vandalizing her car, spreading rumors about illegal drug use, and potentially posting fake nude photos created through digital manipulation. Patricia felt her professional composure slip as she contemplated what her daughter might have endured if the harassment had continued unchecked. What about Jessica Wells? Her devices show she was the strategic planner, Williams explained, displaying text message conversations. She researched Madison's family background, identified psychological pressure points, and coordinated the other two students' activities. She also maintained contact with similar groups at other schools, sharing tactics and comparing success stories. The scope of the conspiracy was far more extensive than Patricia had initially imagined. These weren't troubled teenagers acting impulsively. They were operating a sophisticated harassment network that targeted vulnerable students across multiple educational institutions. Detective Williams, I want you to contact every school district in the state. If they're coordinating with similar groups elsewhere, we're looking at a federal conspiracy that crosses state lines. Already in progress, Chief. Agent Torres requested the same information for her civil rights investigation. At Riverside High, Torres was interviewing witnesses who had observed the harassment campaign over the previous months. She had converted an unused classroom into a temporary interview space where students could speak confidentially about what they had witnessed. Emma Rodriguez, a junior who shared several classes with Madison, provided disturbing details about the systematic nature of the harassment. It wasn't just the three main ones, Emma explained nervously. They had other kids who would do smaller things, block Madison in hallways, knock her books over, stuff like that. They made it seem like a game where you got points for making her uncomfortable. Torres documented Emma's statement carefully, recognizing that the harassment campaign involved far more participants than initially suspected. Did any teachers or administrators witness these incidents? Some teachers saw things happen, but Derek's really good at making it look accidental or like he's just joking around. And when Madison never complained, I think adults assumed everything was fine. The interview continued for 20 minutes, with Emma providing specific dates, locations, and details that corroborated the digital evidence. Torres was building a comprehensive timeline that would support multiple federal charges against the primary conspirators. Her next interview was with Kevin Chen, a senior who had witnessed the hallway confrontation firsthand. I've never seen Madison stand up to anyone before, Kevin told Torres. She always just took whatever they said and walked away. But when Derek said that stuff about her dad, something changed in her face. Did you know about Madison's father's death before the confrontation? No, she never talked about personal stuff. Most people didn't even know her mom was a cop until yesterday. Kevin paused thoughtfully. I think that's why Derek felt so confident. He thought she was just some random smart kid with no connections. Torres made detailed notes about the perpetrator's apparent belief that Madison lacked resources to fight back, a miscalculation that had led them to document their crimes extensively without concern for consequences. Back at the federal building, Patricia was reviewing financial records that painted a disturbing picture of the families involved. Robert Morrison's construction company had received millions in city contracts through processes that appeared to circumvent competitive bidding requirements. Bank records showed suspicious cash deposits that didn't correspond to documented business income. The Wells family's real estate holdings included properties purchased for far below market value from sellers who had been facing foreclosure or tax liens. Several transactions involved land that was later rezoned for commercial development, suggesting advanced knowledge of municipal planning decisions. Thomas Brooks's accounting firm served as financial advisor for numerous businesses that operated in cash-heavy industries, restaurants, construction companies, and import-export firms that generated the type of revenue streams favored by money laundering operations. Patricia's phone rang, displaying Agent Torres's number. Chief Carter, I've completed preliminary interviews at the school. The harassment campaign was more extensive than we initially realized, and it appears to be connected to similar operations at other institutions. How many other schools? At least 12 in our state, possibly more across the region. Jessica Wells maintained communications with coordinators at each location, sharing strategies and target identification methods. Patricia felt the case expanding beyond her original scope. What had begun as seeking justice for her daughter's harassment was revealing a multi-state criminal conspiracy that targeted vulnerable students systematically. Agent Torres, I think it's time to brief the U.S. Attorney's Office. This case requires resources beyond what local federal investigators can provide. Agreed. I'm scheduling a meeting with Assistant U.S. Attorney David Kumar for tomorrow morning. He specializes in civil rights cases with interstate connections. Patricia ended the call and walked to her office window, which overlooked the courthouse where Madison's tormentors would eventually face federal charges. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the building steps, where she had seen countless defendants arrive to face justice for their crimes. Her personal phone buzzed with a text message from Madison. "How was your day?" "Mine was weird. People kept staring at me and whispering." Patricia smiled grimly as she typed her response. "People are realizing there are consequences for their actions. How are you feeling?" "Nervous, but okay. Sarah made my favorite dinner. Will you be home soon?" "On my way now. We have a lot to discuss." The drive home gave Patricia time to process the day's developments. What had started as a mother's anger over her daughter's mistreatment had evolved into a complex federal investigation involving multiple criminal enterprises and interstate conspiracy charges. The Morrison, Wells, and Brooks families had built their comfortable lives on illegal foundations, and their children's harassment campaign had provided the pretext for federal authorities to examine those foundations closely. But Patricia also recognized that Madison would face continued scrutiny. As the investigation proceeded, the viral video had made her a public figure, and the impending federal charges would generate significant media attention. Her quiet, academic daughter would need to navigate a level of public attention that most adults found overwhelming. When Patricia arrived home, she found Madison and Sarah reviewing college application materials at the kitchen table, a reminder that regardless of legal proceedings, Madison's future remained focused on academic achievement and scientific research. "How are the MIT application essays coming along?" Patricia asked, kissing Madison's forehead. "Good, but I'm worried about how this whole situation might affect my admissions chances," Madison replied. "What if colleges think I'm some kind of troublemaker?" Sarah looked up from the essay she was reviewing. "Madison, standing up against systematic harassment demonstrates character that admissions committees respect. You're not the troublemaker in this situation." Patricia sat down at the table and opened her laptop. "Actually, I think your college prospects just improved significantly." "What do you mean?" "Agent Torres contacted MIT's admissions office today to inform them that you're cooperating with a federal civil rights investigation. Universities take these matters very seriously, and your courage in documenting harassment evidence will likely be viewed as an asset rather than a liability." Madison looked confused. "Why would MIT care about my problems with high school bullies?" "Because those bullies were operating a systematic harassment network that targeted academically gifted students. Specifically," Patricia explained, "universities want students who will stand up for their principles and contribute to safe educational environments." Sarah added, "From a psychological perspective, you've demonstrated resilience and problem-solving skills under pressure, exactly the qualities research institutions value in their students." Madison felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension as she realized her worst experience might actually strengthen her future opportunities. What happens next with the investigation? Patricia opened a calendar application on her laptop. "Tomorrow, Agent Torres and I meet with the U.S. Attorney's Office to discuss federal charges. By the end of the week, Derek, Jessica, and Tyler will likely be arrested on multiple felony counts." "Arrested? At school?" "Most likely at their homes, to minimize disruption to other students. But yes, they'll be processed through the federal court system and potentially face prison sentences." The kitchen fell quiet as Madison contemplated the magnitude of consequences her documentation had set in motion. 3 months ago, she had been an invisible student trying to avoid attention. Now she was the key witness in a federal investigation that would reshape multiple families and potentially send her classmates to prison. "Mom, Do you think I did the right thing? Patricia closed her laptop and took Madison's hands in hers. Madison, you documented criminal behavior and reported it to appropriate authorities. That's exactly what every responsible citizen should do when they witness systematic violations of federal law. Sarah nodded in agreement. You protected not just yourself, but potentially dozens of other students who were being targeted by the same network. Madison looked between the two women who had supported her through the most difficult period of her young life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the federal investigation intensified. But tonight she felt secure knowing that justice was finally within reach. The arrests began at dawn on Friday morning, coordinated simultaneously across 3 different neighborhoods to prevent the families from warning each other or destroying additional evidence. FBI tactical teams had been planning the operation for 48 hours, ensuring that each arrest would proceed smoothly despite the high-profile nature of the suspects' families. Derek Morrison was the first to be taken into custody. Federal agents arrived at the Morrison family's sprawling estate on Hillcrest Drive at 6 a.m., just as Derek was leaving for his morning workout routine. He opened the front door expecting to find a delivery driver, instead facing Agent Torres and 4 other federal officers wearing tactical gear and carrying arrest warrants. Derek Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, cyberstalking, and interstate harassment, Torres announced, her voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Derek's face went completely white as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Behind him, his mother screamed from the top of the marble staircase, demanding to know what was happening to her son. Robert Morrison emerged from his home office, already dressed in an expensive suit despite the early hour, his phone pressed to his ear as he frantically called his attorney. "This is outrageous," Robert shouted at the agents. "My son is a minor. You can't arrest him without proper notification." Agent Torres didn't look up from reading Derek his rights. "Mr. Morrison, your son is 18 years old as of last month, making him a legal adult. These are federal charges filed under interstate commerce statutes. Your local political connections have no jurisdiction here." As Derek was escorted to the waiting federal vehicle, news crews that had been tipped off by courthouse sources began arriving at the Morrison estate. The sight of the town's most prominent family's son being arrested by FBI agents created a media frenzy that would dominate local news for weeks. Simultaneously, Jessica Wells was being arrested at her family's historic Victorian mansion on Oak Street. Unlike Derek's dramatic public arrest, Jessica's apprehension occurred quietly in her bedroom as she prepared for school. Agent Williams and 2 other officers had entered through the rear entrance with judicial permission, avoiding the media. Circus developing at the Morrison property. Jessica was applying makeup at her antique vanity when the agents appeared in her doorway. The contrast between her carefully curated social media image and her appearance in handcuffs would later become one of the most shared photographs of the entire case. "Jessica Marie Wells, you're under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, defamation, and coordination of interstate harassment activities," Agent Williams announced. "You have the right to remain silent." Jessica's lawyer father, Gregory Wells, was already downstairs consulting with federal prosecutors by phone. Unlike Robert Morrison's bluster, Gregory understood the severity of federal charges and the futility of political influence against FBI investigations. "Agent Williams, my daughter will cooperate fully with your investigation," Gregory said as Jessica was brought downstairs in handcuffs. "We request immediate arraignment and the opportunity to discuss plea arrangements." "That's between your daughter and the U.S. Attorney's Office," Williams replied professionally. "Right now she's being processed on multiple felony charges." Tyler Brooks's arrest proved the most dramatic of the 3. He was taken into custody at Riverside High School during the first period. as Agent Torres had determined that a public arrest would send the strongest message to other students who might be participating in similar harassment networks. Tyler was sitting in advanced placement history when Principal Richardson's voice came over the classroom intercom. "Tyler Brooks, please report to the main office immediately with your belongings." The classroom fell silent as 30 students realized something serious was happening. Tyler had been increasingly nervous since Derek's arrest had been reported on the morning news, and he knew his own detention was inevitable. Agent Torres was waiting in Richardson's office along with 2 other federal officers and a representative from the school district's legal department. Tyler's parents had been notified and were driving to the school, but the arrest would proceed regardless of their arrival time. "Tyler Brooks, you're under arrest for cyberstalking, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and obstruction of justice," Torres announced as Tyler entered the office. "You have the right to remain silent." Tyler's legs gave out as the handcuffs were applied, and he had to be supported by agents as they escorted him through the main hallway toward the exit. Hundreds of students lined the corridors, many recording the arrest on their phones despite teachers' attempts to maintain order. The image of Tyler being led away in handcuffs past the same lockers where he had photographed Madison without consent became a symbol of accountability that resonated far beyond Riverside High School. By 10 a.m., all 3 suspects were in federal custody at the downtown detention facility, where they would remain until their arraignment hearings later that day. The speed and coordination of the arrests demonstrated the federal government's commitment to prosecuting civil rights violations, regardless of the perpetrators' local connections. Madison learned about the arrests while sitting in her AP Physics class when her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. "All 3 in custody. Federal court arraignment at 2 p.m. I'll pick you up at lunch." The news spread through Riverside High within minutes, transforming the atmosphere from normal academic routine to barely contained chaos. Students gathered in small groups, whispering about federal investigations and wondering who might be arrested next. Teachers struggled to maintain classroom focus as rumors spread about additional suspects and ongoing surveillance. Emma Rodriguez found Madison between classes, her expression mixing excitement with concern. "Madison, is it true that Derek, Jessica, and Tyler were all arrested by the FBI this morning?" Madison nodded, unsure how to process her feelings about seeing her tormentors taken into federal custody. "My mom said they're being charged with multiple felonies. This is incredible," Emma continued. "Everyone's talking about how they might go to prison. Some kids are deleting their social media accounts because they're worried about being investigated too." The realization that other students were now afraid of federal prosecution created a strange dynamic at school. Madison had gone from being an isolated target to being someone whose mother's authority commanded genuine fear and respect from her classmates. At the federal courthouse, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Kumar was preparing for the arraignment hearings that would formally charge the 3 suspects with multiple felonies. Kumar had prosecuted dozens of civil rights cases, but the intersection of educational harassment with ongoing criminal investigations made this case particularly complex. Kumar reviewed the charges one final time with Agent Torres and Chief Carter. Derek Morrison faced conspiracy to violate civil rights, cyberstalking, and intimidation of a witness. Jessica Wells was charged with conspiracy to violate civil rights, defamation, and coordination of interstate criminal activity. Tyler Brooks faced cyberstalking, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and obstruction of justice. "The evidence is overwhelming," Kumar told the assembled law enforcement team. "Between the social media documentation, digital device contents, and witness testimony, conviction on multiple counts is virtually certain." Patricia asked, "What kind of sentences are we looking at?" For first-time offenders, federal civil rights violations typically result in 18 months to 3 years in prison, plus supervised probation and community service requirements. However, The systematic nature of their conspiracy and the interstate coordination elements could enhance those sentences significantly. Agent Torres added, the cyberstalking charges alone carry potential 5-year sentences, and the obstruction counts could add additional time. Kumar nodded grimly. We're looking at potential sentences of 5 to 8 years for each defendant, assuming they don't cooperate with our investigation into their family's business activities. The arraignment hearing began at 2 p.m. in Federal Judge Catherine Morrison's courtroom, no relation to the defendant, despite the shared surname. Madison sat in the gallery beside her mother and Sarah, watching as her former classmates were brought before the court in orange detention, uniforms and restraints. Derek Morrison appeared first, his usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious fear and confusion. His expensive attorney, Marcus Goldstein, entered a plea of not guilty to all charges while requesting immediate bail consideration. Your Honor, my client is an 18-year-old high school student with no prior criminal record, Goldstein argued. He poses no flight risk and should be released to his parents' custody pending trial. Assistant U.S. Attorney Kumar stood to respond. Your Honor, the defendant was operating a systematic harassment network that crossed state lines and targeted vulnerable victims specifically. He demonstrated sophisticated planning and coordination with co-conspirators, showing clear criminal intent. Additionally, the defendant's family is currently under investigation for related criminal activities, making them unsuitable custodians. Judge Morrison reviewed the charges carefully before ruling. Bail is set at $500,000 cash bond, with electronic monitoring and surrender of all digital devices. The defendant is prohibited from contacting any victims or witnesses and from accessing social media platforms. Derek's mother gasped audibly from the gallery as she realized the financial implications of her son's bail conditions. Even for the wealthy Morrison family, posting $500,000 in cash represented a significant financial burden. Jessica Wells's arraignment proceeded similarly, though her father's legal background meant their representation was more sophisticated. Gregory Wells had retained Jennifer Martinez, a federal defense attorney who specialized in civil rights cases. Your Honor, Ms. Wells is prepared to cooperate fully with federal authorities, Martinez announced. She recognizes the severity of her actions and is committed to making amends for the harm she caused. Kumar responded skeptically. Your Honor, the defendant was the primary coordinator of the harassment network. She researched victims, planned psychological attacks, and maintained communications with similar groups across multiple states. Her cooperation comes only after extensive evidence was discovered through court-authorized searches. Judge Morrison set Jessica's bail at $300,000 with similar conditions to Derek's, noting that her apparent willingness to cooperate was offset by her leadership role in the conspiracy. Tyler Brooks's arraignment proved most emotional, as his parents sat in the gallery crying quietly while their son faced federal charges that could result in years in prison. Tyler's attorney, David Park, emphasized his client's youth and the influence of his co-conspirators. Your Honor, Mr. Brooks was clearly following the lead of more dominant personalities, Park argued. His involvement was primarily technical, taking photographs and maintaining digital records rather than strategic planning. Kumar disagreed strongly. Your Honor, the defendant's technical role included cyberstalking activities that constitute independent federal crimes. He photographed victims without consent, maintained detailed surveillance records, and shared degrading images across multiple platforms. His role was essential to the conspiracy's success. Judge Morrison set Tyler's bail at $200,000, noting that his cooperation with investigators might mitigate his culpability during sentencing, but would not excuse his criminal behavior. As the three defendants were returned to detention pending bail hearings, Madison felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She had wanted accountability for the harassment she had endured, But seeing her classmates in federal custody made the consequences feel overwhelmingly real. Outside the courthouse, Madison faced her first experience with media attention as reporters recognized her from the viral video and sought comments about the federal charges. "Madison, how do you feel seeing your former classmates arrested on federal charges?" A reporter from Channel 7 News called out. Patricia stepped protectively in front of her daughter. "This is an ongoing federal investigation. We won't be making statements to the media at this time." But the media attention was just beginning. By evening, the story of 3 wealthy students facing federal charges for harassing a police chief's daughter had been picked up by national news outlets. Madison's quiet stand against systematic harassment had become a symbol of federal commitment to protecting students' civil rights. The Morrison, Wells, and Brooks families were learning that local influence provided no protection against federal prosecution, and their children's harassment campaign had opened their own business activities to federal scrutiny that would ultimately prove far more devastating than teenage criminal charges. As Madison prepared for bed that night, she realized that her life had permanently changed. She was no longer the invisible student trying to avoid attention, but a key witness in a federal case that would be studied and discussed for years to come. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the media attention intensified and her former tormentors began cooperating with federal investigators to reduce their own sentences. But tonight, Madison felt something she hadn't experienced in months: the security of knowing that justice was finally being served. 6 months later, Madison Carter stood at the podium in the MIT admissions office, addressing a room full of prospective students and their families during Accepted Students Weekend. The quiet girl who had once eaten lunch alone in her car was now being introduced as an incoming freshman who had demonstrated exceptional courage in advancing civil rights protections for students nationwide. "When I recorded that video in my high school hallway, I never imagined it would lead to federal legislation," Madison began, her voice steady despite speaking to over 200 people. "But sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone who faces similar challenges." The federal case had concluded 3 weeks earlier with plea agreements that sent shockwaves through multiple communities. Derek Morrison had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison plus 3 years supervised probation. Jessica Wells received 3 years incarceration and was required to testify against harassment networks at other schools. Tyler Brooks, who had cooperated extensively with investigators, was sentenced to 18 months in federal detention, followed by community service speaking to students about cyberbullying consequences. But the harassment charges had been only the beginning. The federal investigation into their family's business activities had uncovered extensive criminal enterprises that resulted in additional prosecutions. Robert Morrison's construction company was revealed to be a money laundering operation for the Castellano crime family, leading to his own 15-year federal sentence. The Wells family's real estate empire collapsed when FBI audits revealed decades of fraud, bribery, and tax evasion. Thomas Brooks lost his accounting license and faced criminal charges for enabling his clients' illegal financial activities. The 3 families that had once dominated Riverside's social and political landscape had been systematically dismantled by federal prosecutors who viewed local influence as irrelevant to justice. Under federal law, Madison's role as the key witness had transformed her from victim to advocate. Her testimony before Congress about systematic harassment in educational settings had contributed to the passage of the Digital Educational Safety Act, which required schools receiving federal funding to monitor and report cyberbullying activities. Universities across the country now cited her case study in their orientation programs about student safety and civil rights protections. "The most important thing I learned," Madison continued her MIT presentation, "is that staying silent about injustice protects the perpetrators, not the victims. When we document wrongdoing and report it to appropriate authorities, We create accountability that extends far beyond our individual situations. Chief Patricia Carter watched from the back of the room, proud of her daughter's transformation from isolated target to confident advocate. The federal investigation had earned Patricia a promotion to deputy director of the Multi-State Criminal Investigation Division, where she now coordinated similar cases across the entire region. Dr. Sarah Mitchell sat beside Patricia, having taken a sabbatical from her medical practice to co-author a research study about the psychological effects of systematic harassment on academically gifted students. Their findings had been published in the Journal of Educational Psychology and were being used to develop intervention programs at schools nationwide. After Madison's presentation, a young student approached her with a familiar story. "Madison, I'm dealing with something similar at my school," the girl said quietly. "Some kids have been posting fake pictures of me online and spreading rumors about my family. I don't know what to do." Madison exchanged contact information with the student and explained the federal resources available for educational harassment cases. Over the past 6 months, she had become an unofficial consultant for families facing similar situations, helping them navigate federal civil rights protections that most people didn't know existed. "The key is documentation," Madison advised. "Screenshot everything, save all communications, and report patterns of behavior rather than isolated incidents. Federal prosecutors need evidence of systematic harassment to build strong cases." Agent Torres, who had become a family friend during the investigation, had established a federal task force specifically focused on educational harassment networks. She frequently consulted with Madison about identifying emerging tactics and developing prevention strategies. Madison's case taught us that harassment campaigns often involve more participants and sophisticated coordination than initially apparent. Torres explained to a conference of law enforcement officials, "Students who appear to be isolated targets may actually be victims of interstate criminal conspiracies that require federal intervention." The broader impact of Madison's stand extended beyond individual prosecutions. Riverside High School had implemented comprehensive anti-harassment policies that included mandatory training for staff and students about federal civil rights laws. Principal Richardson had resigned under pressure, replaced by Dr. Lisa Chun, who prioritized creating safe educational environments over protecting the school's reputation. Social media platforms had also responded to the case by developing improved reporting mechanisms for harassment and cyberstalking. The algorithms that had once amplified cruel content about Madison now automatically flagged similar patterns and referred them to law enforcement agencies. On graduation day, Madison delivered the valedictorian speech to her Riverside High School class. Many students who had witnessed her harassment now understood that they had been observing federal crimes in progress, and several had testified as witnesses during the prosecution. "We learned this year that there are consequences for cruelty," Madison told her graduating class. "But more importantly, we learned that standing up for justice requires courage that most of us possess if we're willing to use it." Derek Morrison's empty chair in the graduating class served as a stark reminder that federal prosecution doesn't pause for academic calendars. He was serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility 3 states away, participating in educational programs designed to address criminal thinking patterns. Jessica Wells had been transferred to a federal women's detention center after violating her plea agreement by attempting to coordinate with harassment networks at other schools. From jail, her additional charges had extended her sentence to 5 years, making her an example of what happened when offenders failed to genuinely accept responsibility for their actions. Tyler Brooks was completing his sentence at a minimum security federal facility while participating in a restorative justice program that required him to speak at schools about the consequences of cyberbullying. His presentations emphasized how quickly teenage cruelty could escalate to federal crimes with life-altering penalties. The day before leaving for MIT, Madison visited the federal courthouse where her case had been prosecuted. Judge Morrison, who had presided over the proceedings, invited her to speak with a new group of defendants facing similar charges. "Your Honor, I want these students to understand that federal law doesn't distinguish between rich bullies and poor ones," Madison told the assembled defendants and their families. "Justice applies equally regardless of your parents' political connections or financial resources." Assistant U.S. Attorney Kumar used Madison's case as a teaching tool for prosecutors nationwide, demonstrating how individual harassment incidents could reveal broader criminal conspiracies requiring federal intervention. The Carter case shows U.S. that thorough investigation of seemingly minor crimes often uncovers major criminal enterprises, Kumar explained to a conference of federal prosecutors. Sometimes protecting one student's civil rights leads to dismantling entire criminal organizations. As Madison packed for college, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that confrontation in the high school hallway. She had gone from being an invisible target to becoming a nationally recognized advocate for student civil rights. Her acceptance to MIT's astrophysics program represented the culmination of academic dreams that her tormentors had tried to destroy. But more significantly, her federal civil rights case had created legal precedents that would protect countless other students facing similar harassment. The quiet girl who had once solved complex equations alone in empty classrooms was now heading to one of the world's most prestigious universities, where she would conduct research that might unlock mysteries of the cosmos. But Madison's greatest achievement wasn't academic, it was learning that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply refusing to accept it as normal. On her final night in Riverside, Madison received a message from a student in California whose harassment case had been successfully prosecuted using legal strategies developed during her investigation. The message read, "Thank you for showing us that we don't have to suffer in silence. Your courage gave me courage." Patricia found Madison reading the message in her empty bedroom, surrounded by boxes packed for her new life at MIT. "Any regrets about how everything unfolded?" Patricia asked. Madison looked up from her phone, considering the question seriously. "Mom, I regret that it took so long for me to stand up for myself. But I don't regret a single consequence that followed. Those 3 made choices that hurt people, and they learned that choices have consequences. Even knowing how much attention and scrutiny you'd face. Especially knowing that," Madison replied firmly. "Because now other students know they have resources and support when they face similar situations. That's worth any discomfort I experienced." As Madison prepared for sleep in her childhood bedroom one last time, she thought about the stars she would soon study through powerful telescopes at MIT. The universe was vast and filled with mysteries, waiting to be explored by people curious enough to ask difficult questions and brave enough to seek truth regardless of obstacles. Tomorrow she would begin the next chapter of her journey, equipped with knowledge that went far beyond academic subjects. She had learned that justice was possible even when it seemed impossible, that federal law protected students regardless of their social status, and that sometimes standing up for yourself meant standing up for everyone. The quiet girl who had once hidden from bullies was now ready to explore the cosmos, armed with the confidence that comes from knowing that courage, documentation, and persistence could overcome any form of systematic cruelty. Madison Carter's story had become proof that in America, federal justice ultimately prevails over local corruption, and that sometimes the most powerful response to harassment is simply refusing to accept it as inevitable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.